All right, today I want to talk to you about postmodern or existential ethics. And first I want to try to define some terms for you. So postmodern literally means after the modern period. The modern period, at least philosophically speaking, went through basically it started in the 16th century and went until the latter part of the 19th, early 20th centuries. And so modernism, this idea, it's kind of going through Rene Descartes in the 1600s to Immanuel Kant, who's writing in the late 1700s, early 1800s, and going into the 19th century. And what modernism was saying is that we can use reason to understand many things about ourselves and in the world. And in the medieval period, the mega narrative was Christianity. Christianity claimed to know where we came from, why we're here, what's going to happen to us when we die, and how we should live in the interim. And this overarching narrative of human life, of what is true, what is good, what is beautiful, became the standard by which people lived in the Western Hemisphere, especially Europe and then later in the United States. Postmodernism, you could actually say Kant kind of started it in the late 1700s. And part of how he started it was he began to talk about the difference between the phenomenal world and the noumenal world. The world of phenomena is the world of appearances. It's how things appear to us. The noumenal world is the world of how things actually are. But humans cannot perceive the noumenal world. We can only perceive the phenomenal world. When we perceive phenomena, we're perceiving it through human eyes, through human ears, through human nostrils, through human sense perception and taste, touch. But if this was a classroom full of pit vipers, you would be perceiving me very differently. I don't know how a pit viper would pick up a heat signature on a Zoom conference call. It would be quite difficult. This was made for human interface, right? Not for viper interface. Same thing, if you were a classroom full of bats, you would be like chirping at me, trying to pick up a sonar signal in which your brain would interpret that into a shape and sights and sounds and smells. We do the same thing with our eyes. We use our eyes to interpret the world and our other senses. Well, Kant is basically saying, if you think the world you perceive is the actual world, you're a naive realist. You need to realize you can only see the world in a limited means or manner. Now, Kant isn't denying the existence of an objective external world. He's simply saying when humans approach that world, we are interpreting it through a human matrix, through a human grid, but we should not confuse that human grid with ultimate reality. Later, what happens is the person that follows Kant, Hegel, he rejects this whole notion of an either-or type of thinking, of black and white type thinking. And it's called the Law of Non Contradiction. It goes all the way back to Aristotle and is part of how we generally think in the West, that something can't be one thing and another thing simultaneously. Something is either right or it's wrong. It's black or it's white. It's left or it's right. And that's all there is to it. Well, Hegel was not happy with just that point, counterpoint, or thesis, antithesis approach. So if the thesis is black, the antithesis would be white. But for an example, if you go to see a black and white movie, there'll be some black and there'll be some white, but the vast majority of the movie is going to be gray, a grayscale. And so Hegel would say, if you want the truth is the whole. You have to take the black, the white, and the gray. And the black, white, and gray all together make the truth, the totality. So the truth is the whole. The thesis is no more true than the antithesis or vice versa. And neither is the synthesis more true than the thesis or the antithesis, but the truth is in the whole altogether. So that is this very inclusive way of looking at truth. Another thing we get from the existentialist Heidegger, a German philosopher, is this concept of aletheia. And aletheia is a Greek word for truth. And just like for the word love, the Greeks have many different words to try to parse out the nuances of what that means. And this particular Greek word for truth means that which is unveiled or uncovered. In this context, no human being knows the truth because stuff is veiled or covered to our perception or understanding. The best we could hope for is little t perspectival subjective truth, like it's true for me, but I have to qualify that. What's true for me may not be true for you because I'm not talking about that capital T absolute objective universal truth. I do not have access to that from my limited human perspective. And the sooner I and everyone else can acknowledge that, the better it will be for us. But when you have people running around claiming that they know absolute truth and trying to impose that on others, that's how we get wars and conflicts and different religious denominations and sects and philosophies of life. And so this idea of aletheia means that which is unveiled is the truth, that which is covered over would be a lie. And I love this definition of truth. So it's not just telling an outright contradictory statement from the way something is, or it violates reality as we know it, but this is like an unveiling of how things are. I think it's significant in the New Testament in John 14:6, the verse, it's Jesus speaking, and he says, I am the way, the aletheia, and the life. No man cometh to the Father but by me. So the Greek word for truth there was aletheia. And literally what that verse is saying now is, I am the truth, or God unveiled, uncovered. I am God that you can see, not the God that is covered. And that is what the incarnation is all about. The God-man, the God that we can approach, not the one that is beyond our imagination, beyond our unholiness, our imperfections. But Jesus humbled himself and came in the form of the man that we might behold him and we might behold and interact with the God-man. And so it's interesting to me that the father of existentialism is a Christian philosopher. And just like postmodernists will reject, I'm sorry, I got distracted by myself. In postmodernism, there is a rejection of those meta-narratives, whether it's reason or science or Christianity or Islam or whatever your ism is. They're saying absolute truth is so beyond us that all we have are these human constructs, but we reject all these human constructs because they're all found wanting. And the first person to systematically go about this, his name was Sauron Kierkegaard, and he was a Danish philosopher, and he was writing in the early 1800s. I think he lived from like 1800 to 1845. And the Denmark that Sauron lived in was a Christian country. In fact, all of Europe saw themselves as Christian countries. So they were under that Christian meta-narrative. But they were also under this meta-narrative of the philosopher Hegel I just mentioned, with his thesis, antithesis, synthesis, the truth is the whole sort of thinking. And Hegel had done a history of philosophy, and he was bold enough to say something like, basically, I've completed philosophy. All we have to do is cross a few T's and dot a few I's, but it is finished. And Kierkegaard, exasperated, is like, have you walked around the block lately? Have you seen how people live? Have you seen the pain and suffering in the world? It may all be nice and neat in your little ivory tower of philosophy, but maybe you need to get down and see what real life is like. And so Kierkegaard begins to attack Hegel's system, but he is also attacking the system of Christianity. And part of what was so, in fact, one of his book was called Attack Upon Christendom. And in this book, he makes fun of his own country, Denmark. And he says, I live in the most remarkable country where virtually everyone is a Christian. Even the dogs and cats are Christians. And to a degree, even the Jews and Muslims are Christians. But the sadness for Kierkegaard was when everyone's a Christian, no one's a Christian. And I just love that insight. It's like the Pixar cartoon, The Incredibles, when Dash's mom's trying to comfort him and telling him he's special. But then she goes on to say, you know, everyone's special, honey. And he looks at her and he goes, if everyone's special, no one's special. And that's how Kierkegaard felt about if everyone was a Christian, then Christianity doesn't mean anything. Christianity just becomes the norm. It just becomes the default of your culture and your enculturation. And so in his book, Attack Upon Christendom, he began to point out some of the horrific flaws in Christian thinking and how they had adopted what he considered worldly thinking and replaced faith with reason and their trust in God with evidence. And so I find this utterly fascinating, especially here in the early part of the 21st century, where evidential apologetics and a well-reasoned faith are pretty standard for most evangelical or conservative Christians. In fact, we have William Lane Craig with his reasonablefaith.org website. Most Christian apologists are trying to use logic and reason, the law of non contradiction, to prove their meta-narrative against other meta-narratives. And part of the irony for me is Christendom came kicking and screaming into the modern era when we left the medieval period where it was faith over reason. And then when we get to the modern period where reason begins to displace faith, Christians fought it tooth and nail. But once Christendom entered into the modern period, now they don't want to leave. And basically every discipline, besides two I can think of, has left modernism and moved into a postmodern spectrum. It started in the humanities with art and literature, and then it's moved all the way into like history, philosophy, other disciplines. The two holdouts are Christian theology and the hard sciences. Like biology or geology, they still want to hold to this reason-based knowledge and truth claims, thinking that through data and evidence and reason, we can prove or demonstrate what is true and what is false. But the postmoderns reject that. They would say science is just your opinion, man. And if you're not seeing that in your society, you have not been paying attention. I mean, there is a full out war against authority and science and anyone who's claiming that they have a special claim on truth. And so what happens is we get a society of relativism where we have battling truth claims, and each side is trying to get others to buy into it or adhere to their narrative. And the postmodern is simply saying, I reject all these meta-narratives. None of them is complete. None of them can give a complete picture of the truth. So back to Sauron Kierkegaard. Kierkegaard is born into this Christian meta-narrative, into this Christian society and culture, and he begins to challenge their truth claims. And especially he focuses on this idea of faith. And he's very much a paradox because he uses reason to show why you can't trust reason. And I find that especially delightful. He's not just some wackadoodle. He's not super emotional or passionate, but he is using logic and reason to deconstruct logic and reason. In fact, he said, God gave me a great intellect with which to tear down the strongholds of the intellectuals. And so Kierkegaard's approach is to first show how unreasonable Christianity is, which is quite opposite than how most of you were probably brought up. And I wish I had my whiteboard here, but I'll draw in the sky. So what happens in most Christendom is people try to build like a stairway of reason. And we have apologetics. And so people might start with trying to prove the existence of God, trying to prove the Bible's authoritative and real, trying to prove that it's a young earth creation or that man was specially created. And so they'll use systematic theology and reason and logic to try to get you really close to this belief of God. Now, I don't know any Christian apologists, whether it's C.S. Lewis or Ravi Zacharias or Francis Schaeffer. I don't think any of them would, not even William Lane Craig would claim you can argue or reason someone into the kingdom of heaven, but it takes faith. But what they're doing is they're trying to give you so much reason that you only need a little bit of faith, that last little 0.01% to leap or hop into the arms of Jesus. Kierkegaard is thinking, what madness? If faith is what's pleasing to God, why would you do everything you can to minimize faith? So he uses his reason to show you how unreasonable Christianity is. So instead of his stairway leading towards God, his stairway is descending away from God. And he starts to point out all the unreasonable things in Christendom. Like, I'm sorry, but virgin births aren't reasonable. Resurrections from the dead aren't reasonable. The infinite becoming incarnate into space and time is completely illogical. A perfect, holy God loving us is not rational. And so Kierkegaard is using his reason to show how unreasonable Christianity is. But what that means is, in order for us to believe in God, now instead of taking that little 0.01% hop of faith into the arms of Jesus, we must make a leap of faith if we want to believe. And so Kierkegaard is really into this whole idea of faith over reason. Whenever his faith and reason collide, he always places faith over reason. And the word for this is called fideism. So Kierkegaard was a fideist, faith over reason. And so he sees it like a teeter-totter. If you have light faith, you'll have heavier reason. If you have heavier faith, you'll have lighter reason. And so he sees them almost as mutually exclusive. Very different from Thomas Aquinas, who saw faith and reason as kind of overlapping and both coming from God. Kierkegaard is like, no, it's faith over reason. That is what we want. Okay. So what does this look like in terms of an ethic? We have Kierkegaard combating reason. We have him talking about how faith is this inward subjective experience. It's this encounter we have with God or the Holy Spirit that allows us to believe. But that type of faith gives us perfect assurance. So now our trust is no longer in data and facts and our reason, but in this faith we have in God is who he claims to be, and Jesus is who he claimed to be. Now, what I'd like to do is, I can't define existentialism. I wish I could for you. But part of the reason I can't define it is because it is so radically individual and subjective that every single one of you here in this talk could give your own definition of existentialism, and I don't have the right, even though I'm a philosopher, even though I've studied existentialism for 30 plus years, I don't get to be the standard or say what it is and tell you that what you're saying is wrong. So that's very interesting right off the get-go. So this very strong sense of individualism and subjectivity, which leads to relativism. So what I can give you is themes of existentialism that many, but not all existentialists would adhere to. So look at it this way. Here are themes that may or may not apply to existentialist philosophers. The first theme I mentioned is individuality. The next would be this idea of angst. And angst, I love the word angst. It means anxiety, fear, and dread. But it's an anxiety, fear, and dread of you know not what. It's like a splinter in your mind. You know something is wrong, but you can't quite put your finger on it. Kierkegaard believed this was caused because of our alienation from God by sin. And so it always left us feeling at ease. We always knew something was wrong. We were just always expecting for the other shoe to drop. And he believes the way that angst can be dealt with is through the person and work of Christ, that we can find our peace and reconciliation in Christ through faith. The next theme of existentialism, so individualism, angst, would be alienation. In this room right now, we've got like 16 participants. There are at least 16 different classes happening right now. Maybe more. Maybe some of you are having multiple classes going on in your mind. I have never taught the same class twice. Even though I've taught ethics for 25 years, I have never given the same lecture twice. There's always a variation. There's always a change because I'm changing. I have different perspectives. I'm learning. I'm growing. I'm changing my points of view. But because we are all living in our own worlds, no one else can hope to understand us. Now, you may have close friends. You may even have soulmate status friends, but I don't care. I don't care how close you are to someone, how transparent and open you can be with them. You can tell them every deep, dark secret of your soul, but because they are not you, they are not going to get it. They are not going to get you. Now, they may get you more than someone else, but no one is fully going to get you because they are not you. And think about it. Even with your own family or friends, when you talk about, like we have Thanksgiving coming up. I love to talk about past Thanksgivings with my families, but the more we have those discussions, you soon realize you were the only one there because no one else remembers it the way you did. I mean, some people have completely different memories. And even in this classrooms, some of you love this class, some of you, it's a highlight for you. Others are just like, good Lord, I can't believe they're making us take this. It's across the spectrum. The same classroom, but it's being taken in so many different perspectives and angles, different points of view. And once again, Kierkegaard only believes that through Christ, alienation can be bridged. Because since we're individuals and I can't know you and you can't know me, the only one who can truly know us to the core of our being is God, because God is all-knowing. So if we have the Spirit of God within us, and say William has the Spirit of God in him and Michael has the Spirit of God in him, now the Spirit in me can commune with the Spirit of God in William. The Spirit of William can commune with the Spirit of God in Michael. The Spirit of God in Michael can commune with the Spirit of God in Fred and with William, etc. So now we can have a fellowship and understanding that we could not have had apart from that Spirit of God. But this is a very Christian type of existentialism. For those without the Spirit of God in them, there is no solution to that dilemma. They are constantly living in a state of alienation and angst. The next theme I want to talk about is freedom. Existentialists believe you have real choices with real consequences. Now, it doesn't mean I could choose to dunk a basketball. I don't think I will ever dunk a basketball. I can think about it, I can practice, I can train, I could lose weight, but because of my height, my stature, my coordination, whatever, I'm not going to dunk a basketball. But I can do the best I can with the skills I have. I have a choice with my intention and with my attitudes, how I respond to my circumstances, even if I can't control the circumstances themselves. So for example, some people are born with the Denny's 2-pack of coloring crayons, and other people are born with the Crayola 264-pack. That is out of your control. You did not get to choose what kind of gifts or crayons you were born with. What you do get to choose is whether you're grateful for the crayons you have and how you choose to use them. That is within your control. How many crayons you get isn't, but what you do with them is. And so that's the type of freedom we're talking about. We're not talking about circumstantial freedom. We're talking about that internal freedom. One more example. I think this is from Viktor Frankl, and it takes place during like the Holocaust and concentration camps. And what he observed was some of the Jewish prisoners were actually more free than their Nazi captors. And what he meant by that, even though the Jews were physically imprisoned, they were free in their mind, where even though these Nazi captors were free from being confined in the gulags, they were prisoners in their mind. And I love that observation. You can be free even in a prison cell with this philosophy of life, because true freedom is happening in here. It doesn't have to do with what's happening out there. Also, this idea of there are no victims unless you make yourself one in existentialism. That is a choice. And I'm not trying to say bad things don't happen to people. I'm not saying they bring it upon themselves, even though there are theories about that. What we're saying here is it's a state of mind. If you get abused or beaten or robbed or raped or some other horrible thing happens to you, what you let that do to you is largely up to you. You do not have to give power to that other person that assailed you or abused you. That power has to be given up from the inside out. People cannot harm your true inner self from the outside in. That is something that has to happen internally. And I think that's really powerful. The next theme is authenticity, which means being true to yourself. But this goes all the way back to Socrates. First, you have to know yourself before you can be true to who that self is. So part of the existential journey is to find yourself, find your purpose and meaning in life, and then be true to that. Not what your mama said, not what your teacher said or preacher, not what the government says or your church. Be true to who you are, and that is where you will find authentic life. And then the next is a rejection of categories or labels. Kierkegaard said, if you label me, you negate me. For years, when I was a young man about your age, I had come back to Jesus after my little existential seeking and wandering, but I did not want to be called a Christian. And it wasn't because I was ashamed of Jesus. It was because I was ashamed of Christendom and what it looked like in our country. And this was 30 years ago. And I'm really feeling that way again after all these years, maybe even more so. And I may have to stop calling myself a Christian again. I called myself a follower of the way for years. And I figured if people really cared, they would ask, what way is that? And then I could say, I'm a follower of Jesus's way. But when you have a label like Christian or evangelical or fundamentalist, in people's minds, that's already a category, right? And they may be positively, negatively, or neutrally disposed towards that label. But when so many people have a negative category or label of Christianity or evangelicalism, I find it counterproductive sometimes to use those labels, if that makes any sense. So if you label me, you negate me. Kierkegaard wanted to be treated as an individual and treated on his own merits, not because he was a white male, not because he was a philosopher, not because he was a Dane, not because he was a Christian, but the individual Sauron Kierkegaard. The next theme is truth is subjectivity. Okay. Woo! And basically what he's saying is he's not denying that there's absolute objective truth, capital T truth. He's simply saying, you and I do not know what that is. What I know is my own personal Fred truth or Sauron truth, but I don't know William's truth or Michael's truth unless they want to share it with me. But even then, I'm going to interpret your truth through my filters, through my personal experience, through my lenses. So all truth, or let me not say all truth, truth is subjective, meaning from a human perspective, that's the only kind of truth that is available to us. The one exception, I guess, would be the truth that comes from faith, but that's like a revealed truth from God, if faith is a gift from God. It's not something we can conjure up from within ourselves. It's not wishful thinking. It's a certainty that comes from God himself to our very nous, that highest part of our mind. Which means if truth is subjective, it means truth is relative. I have my truth, you have your truth. And that's, to me, that's exactly what we're seeing in Western societies today. We have a very relativistic idea of truth. And then the last theme I want to share with you is you only know what you have personally experienced. And what he means by this is, if someone else tells you something, or you read it in a book, or you get it off the internet or something like that, it's secondhand knowledge. You don't really know something, like truly know it, until you have experienced it for yourself personally. So for example, heroin. I've never tried heroin. I know quite a bit about it, unfortunately, because of family members and other things who have struggled, and I've researched, I've helped people through addictions, through withdrawals. I see what it does to your body, to your mind, to your self-esteem. But having never taken heroin, I don't really know about heroin. Does that make sense? I would need to take heroin to truly know what heroin would do to me personally, Fred Blackburn. Now, that is a type of knowledge I personally don't want to have, and I'm happy with the secondhand knowledge through friends, family, literature, or books. But I can't, and so I would never tell a junkie, oh, I know just how you feel. Well, for one thing, I don't know how they feel because I'm not a junkie. And secondly, even if I was a junkie, I wouldn't know how they felt because I'm not them. And those of you who are studying counseling or psychology, there's been a lot of existential influence upon that discipline, especially in Gestalt therapy and other sorts of postmodern therapies, with this idea of you're not labeling your patient, you're not categorizing them, you are trying to enter into their world to understand them and to try to help them understand if they don't acknowledge or conform to other aspects of our collective reality, people are either going to incarcerate them or medicate them or in some way remove them from the general population. We're not saying people are insane or crazy. We're simply saying your subjective truth is not aligning close enough with the collective subjective truth to keep you from not being medicated, is what we're saying. You may be the sane one. The rest of us may be crazy, but because you're not conforming to the collective or to the standard, you're the one who is the odd person out. And so there we have existentialism. I can't define it, but those are some of its themes and what it looks like being applied to a philosophy of life. I'm gonna show you over the next couple of days what I consider one of the greatest existential movies of all time. And it's called Harold and Maude. And I'll be playing it here and I'll record it for those of you that don't make it. You can watch it later. And we'll be doing that on Monday and Wednesday of next week. And then we'll have the midterm the following week after that. And Lord willing, parts 2 and 3 of The Dead Have No Need of Ethics will be available on Amazon. There's my commercial for the day.